Good afternoon. It is so good to be with you all today virtually as we cover the last four chapters of the book of Ecclesiastes. This is the second to last class of this quarter. Next week, Kyle will be wrapping this up with studying the Song of Solomon as we conclude our study this quarter of the wisdom literature. As we are covering Ecclesiastes chapters 9, 10, 11, and 12 today, there was a lot to go over. And so I'll have a few comments to say about the class in general at the end, but we're just going to jump right into it. Give me just a second to open up the PowerPoint. Okay. This is Lighting the Way, lesson 12. This is the last lesson on Ecclesiastes. As I said, we have one more. Today our focus will be on respecting and obeying God, which is more or less just another way of saying fear God and keep his commandments, which we'll discuss at the end of class. But that is also in our memory verse, which we'll look at here at the beginning of class. The end of the matter, all has been heard. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God will bring every deed into judgment, with every secret thing, whether good or evil. Ecclesiastes 12, verses 13 and 14. This is the fourth week, I believe, that this has been our memory verse, and today we'll finally have the opportunity to talk about it right at the end of class, since this is how the book of Ecclesiastes concludes. The next slide is a slide I've had on the previous two classes, just giving some general information about some of the key words and phrases that we see here in the book of Ecclesiastes. And understanding these phrases are key. They're vital to gaining a complete understanding, at least I believe, to the book of Ecclesiastes. As we get into chapter 9 today, I want you to think about some of the themes that we have seen throughout the first 8 chapters of this book. The idea that things happen in cycles, and things are and will be as they've always been. The fact that we are not in as much control as we think we are, but rather God is in control. And let's help us to remember the proper ways that we should be happy, the ways to find true joy and happiness in our lives. In the first class, I discussed the two perspectives that we find in this book. The first being the life without God, and the second being the life with God. And I told you that as we move through the book, we see the preacher going back and forth between these two perspectives. But I said that as we get closer to the end of the book, we see more of the perspective of the life with God. And you will see that today in all of our readings. I encourage you to open your Bibles to Ecclesiastes chapter 9. Some of these readings today are rather long, and I did my best to include the entire reading on the slide. But for some, the words may be kind of small, and so I encourage you to have your Bibles open. I'll be reading from the English Standard Version. You can read along in your Bibles while I'm reading it from the slide, and then you can reference the passages that we are going over, the questions from the worksheet. But the first reading today is Ecclesiastes chapter 9, verses 1 through 9. But all this I laid to heart, examining it all, how the righteous and the wise and their deeds are in the hand of God. Whether it is love or hate, man does not know. Both are before him. It is the same for all, since the same event happens to the righteous and the wicked, to the good and the evil, to the clean and the unclean, to him who sacrifices and him who does not sacrifice. As the good one is, so is the sinner, and he who swears is as he who shuns an oath. This is an evil in all that is done under the sun, that the same event happens to all. Also, the hearts of the children of man are full of evil, and madness is in their hearts while they live, and after that they go to the dead. But he who is joined with all the living has hope. For a living dog is better than a dead lion. For the living know that they will die, but the dead know nothing, and they have no more reward, for the memory of them is forgotten. Their love and their hate and their envy have already perished, and forever they have no more share in all that is done under the sun. Go, eat your bread with joy, and drink your wine with a merry heart, for God has already approved what you do. Let your garments be always white. Let not oil be lacking on your head. Enjoy life with the wife whom you love, all the days of your vain life that he has given you under the sun, because that is your portion in life and in your toil, at which you toil under the sun. For our questions, question number 1, according to verse 1, where are the righteous in their deeds? Well, the righteous in their deeds, it says, are in the hand of God. From chapter 8, which we discussed at the end of our last class, we know the evil and good happen to both the evil and the good. And this may not seem fair, and that's because it isn't fair. But we know that God will take care of us, and he will protect those who respect and obey him. How comforting is that those of us that are righteous are in the hand of God. He's there holding us and protecting us. Question number 2. How does chapter 9, verse 4 contradict chapter 4, verse 2? Chapter 4, verse 2 says, "And I thought the dead who were already dead more fortunate than the living who are still alive." While verse 4 here in chapter 9 says, "He who is joined with all the living has hope, for a living dog is better than a dead lion." So in chapter 4, it seems that, from the perspective of the preacher, it is better to be among the dead. But now here in chapter 9, it's better to be among the living. Well, the difference is that in this passage, the preacher is looking through the perspective of a life with God. God holds us in his hand. He provides comfort and protection, and here, hope and life. And if that's not encouraging, I don't know what is. Question number 3. Why does the preacher tell us to enjoy life with the wife whom you love? He says because that is our portion in life and our toil at which we toil under the sun. The preacher encourages us to enjoy our spouses and to enjoy the pleasures we have in life for the same reason that he encourages us to enjoy the work that we do. And that's because this is a gift from God to enjoy. We work hard every day, and we should enjoy the small things in life. We've talked about this. I believe, in the second lesson of enjoying the work that we do, enjoying the small things. And here he specifically mentioned enjoying time with your spouse, enjoying someone that you love and someone that loves you back. We'll move on to our second reading, Ecclesiastes chapter 9, verses 10 through 17. "Whatever your hand finds to do, do it with all your might. For there is no work or thought or knowledge or wisdom in Sheol, to which you are going. Again I saw that under the sun the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, nor bread to the wise, nor riches to the intelligent, nor favor to those with knowledge. But time and chance happen to them all. For man does not know his time, like fish that are taken in an evil net, and like birds that are caught in a snare. So the children of man are snared at an evil time, when it suddenly falls upon them. I have also seen this example of wisdom under the sun, and it seemed great to me. There was a little city with few men in it, and a great king came against it and besieged it, building great siege works against it. But there was found in it a poor wise man, and he by his wisdom delivered the city. Yet no one remembered that poor man. But I say that wisdom is better than might, though the poor man's wisdom is despised and his words are not heard. The words of the wise heard in quiet are better than the shouting of a ruler among fools. Question number 1. Since speed, strength, wisdom, intelligence, or knowledge, the things mentioned in this passage, will not decide our fate, what 2 things will decide our fate? Those 2 things are time and chance. This is another example. We've talked about this before. This is another example of the preacher realizing just how little control he has in his life. And same with us, the little control that we have in our lives. And sometimes it seems like we do have control in our lives, but this is just an illusion. Things happen that we can have no control over. Maybe we might fall into poverty, or we might lose our job, or lose a family member, there's a disease or a pandemic. We may think that we have control in the things of our lives, but it's an illusion. We have no control over what happens in our lives. Question number 2. Considering this previous question, how can we live life with courage, knowing that time and chance will happen to us all? And I give you a hint of the very first verse of our first reading today. And that's that the righteous in their deeds are in the hand of God. We may not control what is going on in our lives, but God is in control. And isn't that great? God has such a better idea of what is better for us than we do. We may think we know what is best for us, but God really knows what is best for us. And it is so encouraging to know that He is there controlling our lives and protecting us and giving us life. No matter what we go through, God will be there for us. We talked in the last class, and even in this class a little bit, how wicked and righteous things happen to both the wicked and the righteous. But in the end, God will even things out. But in order to be in the hand of God, in order to be righteous, we need to fear Him and keep His commandments. We'll get to that in chapter 12. Our next reading is Ecclesiastes chapter 10, verses 5 through 20. There is an evil that I have seen under the sun, as it were an error proceeding from the ruler. Folly is set in many high places, and the rich sit in a low place. I have seen slaves on horses, and princes walking on the ground like slaves. He who digs a pit will fall into it, and a serpent will bite him who breaks through a wall. He who quarries stones is hurt by them, and he who splits logs is endangered by them. If the iron is blunt, and one does not sharpen the edge, he must use more strength. But wisdom helps one to succeed. If the serpent bites before it is charmed, there is no advantage to the charmer. The words of a wise man's mouth win him favor, but the lips of a fool consume him. The beginning of the words of his mouth is foolishness. At the end of his talk is evil madness. A fool multiplies words, though no man knows what is to be. And who can tell him what will be after him? The toil of a fool wearies him, for he does not know the way to the city. Woe to you, O land, when your king is a child, and your princes feast in the morning. Happy are you, O land, when your king is a son of the nobility, and your princes feast at the proper time, for strength, and not for drunkenness. Through sloth the roof sinks in, and through indolence the house leaks. Bread is made for laughter, and wine gladdens life, and money answers everything. Even in your thoughts, do not curse the king, nor in your bedroom curse the rich, For a bird of the air will carry your voice, or some winged creature tell the matter. There is so much that we could look at in this passage, but that's not necessarily the point of this class. The point is to get a high-level view of each of these passages that we cover. So we'll look at 3 questions pertaining to this reading. First, what are some of the opposites or things that you wouldn't expect to happen in the first part of chapter 10? Well, we can see this in verses 5 through 9, how there's slaves on horses, and the princes are walking by the horse instead of riding it. The person that digs a pit falls into it, and someone breaks down the wall, and the serpent bites them. And all of these things are, in a sense, opposites, and are things that you wouldn't expect to happen, but do end up happening. And the point is a point I've made. I feel like I've made this point a million times, but this point is made a million times in this book. And that's that we have no control over what happens. The things that have been are the things that will be and are now. But we are not in control of our lives. Every time that we think that we have life figured out, life just throws us another curveball. And we have to reconsider life again. But those who fear the Lord, which is what we'll talk about in chapter 12, will not waver. Abraham had a curveball thrown at him. He and Sarah were over 90 years old, and he still did not have a rightful heir, a son between him and Sarah. But Romans 4:20 says, "No unbelief made him," that is Abraham, "waver concerning the promise of God, but he grew strong in his faith as he gave glory to God." May we have a faith as strong as the faith that Abraham had, that we would give our lives to God and let God take control. He is in control, but I guess the better way to say it is for us to realize that God is already in control. Question number 2. What are the end results of the words of the wise and the fool? Well, the words of the wise win him favor. The New American Standard Version, the New American Standard Bible, says that the words from the mouth of the wise man are gracious. And I really like that because it gives more the idea that the words the wise man say are encouraging, they're uplifting, they make someone full of joy. And he's just a good influence and an encourager to everyone that comes near him. Now it says the words of the foolish man consumed him. The idea here is that his words end up destroying him and just absolutely ruining his life. It even says that his words are disastrous from beginning to end. And so we should really be careful with what we say. And I hope that we would always speak with discretion and with wisdom. But along the same lines, question number 3, why should we be careful what we say? What you say always has a way of making it around to everyone. There's an idea in politics called the ears have walls. And it's the idea that some politician, and this happens to nearly every politician that runs for president, they say something to a small group of people that they think is only going to be kept among these 4 or 5 people, but then it gets out into the media and to the general public what they say. And it's because they weren't thinking about what they said. And we just need to be careful with the things that we let come from our mouth. But I think that's kind of a shallow way of looking at this in the end of this passage here, I don't think it's just talking about like what we speak. It mentions thoughts. I think it's more of the idea of the attitude that we should have towards rulers, but towards everyone. If at all possible, we should only think about holy and godly things. Philippians 4 verse 8 says, "Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence, if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things." And that is exactly the attitude that the preacher here is emphasizing. The idea that we should be thinking on holy and godly and pure things, anything that is excellent or worthy of praise. Our next reading is actually the entire chapter of Ecclesiastes chapter 11. So we'll start in verse 1. "Cast your bread upon the waters, for you will find it after many days. Give a portion to 7 or even to 8, for you know not what disaster may happen on earth. If the clouds are full of rain, they empty themselves on the earth. And if a tree falls to the south or to the north, in the place where the tree falls, there it will lie. He who observes the wind will not sow, and he who regards the clouds will not reap. As you do not know the way the Spirit comes to the bones in the womb of a woman with child, so you do not know the work of God who makes everything. In the morning sow your seed, and at evening withhold not your hand, for you do not know which will prosper, this or that, or whether both alike will be good. Light is sweet, and it is pleasant for the eyes to see the sun. So if a person lives many years, let him rejoice in them all. But let him remember that the days of darkness will be many. All that comes is vanity. Rejoice, O young man, in your youth, and let your heart cheer you in the days of your youth. Walk in the ways of your heart and in the sight of your eyes, but know that for all these things God will bring you into judgment. Remove vexation from your heart, and put away pain from your body, for youth and the dawn of life are vanity." Question number 1. What 3 things from chapter 11, verses 3 through 4, do we have no control over? We have no control over when the clouds rain, where or when a tree falls, and when the wind blows. Again, here's the same point. We have no control over how, where, or when things will happen in our lives. What's interesting here in verses 4 and 5 is that the word wind in verse 4 and the word spirit in verse 5 are actually the same Hebrew word. And the purpose here is to relate the kind of the hiddenness and even more so the lack of control of both of these events. And the fact that we don't know how they work. We don't understand, and we can't understand. But there is one that does understand, and he is in control, as we have stated. Question number 2. What does the preacher encourage the person who lives many years to remember? He encourages this person to remember that the days of darkness will be many. For the most part, Ecclesiastes 11 is pretty happy and optimistic, but the preacher does want to give the reality of life and the reality of the situation. And he wants to remind those that despite living many years, there will be days that are dark, that are sad, and that are discouraging. The light of youth will eventually grow dim. Our last reading will be Ecclesiastes chapter 12. Ecclesiastes chapter 12. This is the last chapter of this book. Starting in verse 1. Remember also your Creator in the days of your youth, before the evil days come, and the years draw near of which you will say, I have no pleasure in them. Before the sun and the light and the moon and the stars are darkened and the clouds return after the rain. In the days when the keepers of the house tremble, and the strong men are bent, and the grinders cease because they are few, and those who look through the windows are dimmed, and the doors on the street are shut, when the sound of the grinding is low, and one rises up at the sound of a bird, and all the daughters of song are brought low. They are afraid also of what is high, and terrors are in the way. The almond tree blossoms, the grasshopper drags itself along, and desire fails, because man is going to his eternal home, and the mourners go about in the streets. Before the silver cord is snapped, or the golden bowl is broken, or the pitcher is shattered at the fountain, or the wheel broken at the cistern, and the dust returns to the earth as it was, and the spirit returns to God who gave it. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. All is vanity. Besides being wise, the preacher also taught the people knowledge, weighing and studying and arranging many proverbs with great care. The preacher sought to find words of delight, and uprightly he wrote words of truth. The words of the wise are like goads, and like nails firmly fixed are the collected sayings. They are given by one shepherd. My son, beware of anything beyond these. Of making many books there is no end, and much study is a weariness of the flesh. The end of the matter, all has been heard. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God will bring every deed into judgment with every secret thing, whether good or evil. Our first question: what three R's does the preacher say to the youth in chapters 11 and 12? Well, the first R is rejoice. Rejoice in your youth. Enjoy life. Have fun. Do what seems pleasing to you. But he gives the reality of the situation. All these things that we do, all the fun that we might have, all of the pleasures that we may seek, God will bring all these into judgment. So while it is good to have fun, to enjoy youth, we do need to remember that God is first. The second R is remove vexation from your heart. This is the idea of don't worry more than necessary. You are going to reach an age where you will have a lot to worry about. You have a job and a spouse and family and many other obligations that take your time. The word pain in that verse is translated from a word that means more of the idea of evil. And this goes back to the end of verse 9, talking about God's judgment and how we need to remember that for all these things, God will judge us, good and evil. The third R, and the one I want to spend a little bit more time on, is remember your Creator in the days of your youth. Let's not get wrapped up in all the things that happen as we're young. The evil days, they're referring to the days where you would grow old. And when you don't enjoy your days as much as you used to, the things you used to find pleasure in, you don't find as pleasurable in. I'm only 23, and so maybe I have, I can't justify saying this at all, but I've been getting older, and last December I graduated college. In February I started the first job of my career, and I don't enjoy some of the things that I enjoyed just a year ago, or especially several years ago. And that's okay, because I found joy in other things. Um, but that's just a part of growing up, and that's just a part of the cycle of life. But this section is really interesting here in chapter 12 because the preacher gives a whole lot of metaphors that refer to the body breaking down. And I do kind of want to go through these for those that may have not studied this themselves or may need a refresher. But it starts there: the grinders cease because they are few. The idea that as you're getting older, your teeth don't work as well, or maybe they fall out and you lose them. The windows are dim, that is, the eyes are growing dim. The sound of grinding is low. The ears have become hard of hearing. You rise at the sound of a bird. That is, as you get older, I've been told that as you get older, you have trouble sleeping. And you go to bed early and you get up early. And maybe you slept for a while, but you weren't rested. It says that the almond tree blossoms. Is the idea that if you've ever seen an almond tree blossom, they're white. This is referring to your hair grows gray and white. The grasshopper drags itself along. The grasshopper is obviously best known for ability to jump. This is the idea that the legs aren't working as well as they used to. Desire fails. Desires that we used to have no longer seem as desirable. And then there's some metaphors talking about just the end of life. The silver cord is snapped. When I hear that, I think of like a really ornate and beautiful chandelier that just, one snip of the cord and it comes falling and crashing to the ground. Then talks about these beautiful and ornate pieces of pottery that are destroyed in just a blink of an eye. And then finally, it says the dust returns to the earth. And if you're a Bible student, you'll think probably of the creation of Adam. And that's the fact that God created Adam from the dust of the earth. And this is on purpose, I think. We're supposed to think back to that. Then finally, the spirit returns back to God. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. All is vanity. This is kind of the end of the preacher's writings on the thoughts that he has about life. And now we enter the conclusion, the last six verses of this chapter. Question 2, how does the preacher describe the words of the wise? He describes them in 2 ways. First, he describes them by saying that they are like goads. This is the idea that they point us in the right direction. For those of you that don't know, a goad is a long stick with a point on the end, and a shepherd might use it to point sheep in the right direction to get them to move if they're being stubborn. So this is the idea that the words of the wise should move us in the way that we are supposed to go. Then the second way he describes the words of the wise is that they are like nails. And he describes them as nails because they are permanent truth. They're permanent truths that cannot be removed or replaced. Question 3, what is the whole duty of man? Fear God and keep his commandments. That is our whole duty in life. Everything that we've been talking about for the past 2 weeks has led up to these last 2 verses here. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. And I want you to think about everything we've talked about. We've talked about the vanity and the brevity of life, how life is just like a vapor. It's here and then it's gone. We talked about how life is the same generation after generation. Joys are the same year after year, but so are sin, and so are sorrows. And maybe they come in different forms, but they're still the same. It's the same thing over and over again. We've talked about finding happiness in life. We've talked about the lack of control that we have in life. We've talked about the unfairness of life, how evil and good things happen to evil and good people. They are not mutually exclusive to the kind of person. And so how do we reconcile all this? Fearing God and keeping his commandments is the solution to all of these life issues that we've discussed the past 3 weeks. In these 12 chapters, the preacher has looked at life without God. He's looked at life with God. Which has he chosen? Well, he's chosen life with God. And for the reasons that we've been talking about for 3 weeks. God holds us in his hand. He is there for us our entire lives. He will protect us. He will comfort us. He will give us hope. And most importantly, he has given us life and will continue to give us life. So to kind of wrap up this class, let's look at some conclusions. And these are some conclusions from this specific class, but this can be applied to the entire book. First, life is very uncertain, but we can take comfort in the fact that God holds the righteous in his hand. We've talked about that quite a bit today. Enjoy your youth before the evil days come. Enjoy the time when you have the energy and the time and the resources to just enjoy all the small things in life. Fear God and keep his commandments. We've talked about that. Finally, God will bring every deed into judgment, whether good or evil. We should examine our lives to see whether or not we are living righteously, whether or not we are respecting and obeying God, whether or not we are fearing God and keeping his commandments. Well, this has been Ecclesiastes. There is so much more that we could have talked about. And these lessons have been longer, I know, than some of the other ones in this class. And I thank you for your patience as you've sat through these. I have thoroughly enjoyed preparing for this class and studying this book with you. And feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions about anything that is in the book of Ecclesiastes, or things that I've said or discussed. I cannot guarantee I'll have the answer for you, but I will. I'll do about anything to help you understand the Bible just a little bit better. Next week, Kyle's gonna clean up the mess I made, and he's gonna look at the Song of Solomon, and we'll wrap up this class on wisdom literature. Thank you so much for listening today and the past 2 weeks. As I said, we couldn't cover nearly everything in this book, but I did my best to pull out some main themes and to see how they're emphasized throughout the book. But anyways, thank you so much for listening. Have a good day.